life without despair is a life without hope.
A breathless account of the horrors of the First World War. Paul Schrader's writing and directing is celebrated here in Paris, and Marnie's chilling beauty returns to the big screen 55 years later. Well, that's all coming up in today's show, and to tell us more, I'm joined by film critic Lisa Nesselson. Hi, Lisa.
Hello, Olivia.
Now, we're starting with a film that's just been nominated for 10 Academy Awards, 1917. It follows two young British soldiers from the trenches to the front lines. They're on a life and death mission. Now, it's already won the Golden Globe for Best Drama. Sam Mendes won Best Director, and he's the man behind American Beauty, of course, and the Bond film Skyfall. So what's your take on 1917 then?
Well, we now know that war is good for one thing, and that's award ceremonies that highlight films about war. Skyfall is a fine 007 title, but here the sky really was falling. Things really were falling out of the sky, such as bombs and German planes with German pilots in their cockpits. Watching this movie 103 years after the action is set is like receiving a text message every few minutes that says, "War is hell." The main characters are Schofield and Blake, who wake up in a camp of their fellow British soldiers, are summoned to the commanding officer, and without even time to eat breakfast, are given an impossible assignment. Now, it looks as if the Germans have picked up and left and are in retreat at dawn, so less than 24 hours later. British troops, thinking the Hun is on the run, are going to attack. But that's what the Germans are hoping they'll do. It's a trap. Schofield and Blake have a written order to call off the assault. Blake's older brother is among the 1,600 soldiers who will certainly be slaughtered if that hand-carried message doesn't arrive in time.
Extremely high stakes indeed. Well, let's hear more from director Sam Mendes about why 1917 was such a technical challenge, and then we can take a look at a clip too.
Everything had to be interlinked. So there's no way of building it until we'd rehearsed it with the actors. So we were rehearsing for months and months, and then building and rehearsing again, building. It was a technical challenge. But the reason for all that technical challenge was because I wanted the audience to connect emotionally with the central characters and never leave their side.
We should put him out of his misery.
So technically, getting that one continuous take is extremely complicated for them. And so why is the sensation that it gives us visually of that shot, why is it so important?
Well, to get the timing right for 1917, they actually rehearsed for 6 months. Mendes calls it, quote, a permanent dance between the characters, the camera, and the landscape, end quote. Now, you may not be aware that until the digital era, a scene couldn't last more than 12 minutes in a row, because that's how much film the Mickey Mouse ears in the camera could hold. Alfred Hitchcock's theatrical but satisfying Rope, made back in 1948, is comprised of 8 uninterrupted 10-minute takes, artfully punctuated with visually clever transitions. Digital equipment opened up the possibility of continuous shots lasting for hours, if that's what you're after. It's the sensation that we are actually sharing the ordeal. And 1917 is a superb experience at the movies. But I'd argue that the best film made to date about World War I was made by Stanley Kubrick in 1957. Produced by and starring Kirk Douglas, Paths of Glory was so powerful in its indictment of the stupidity of war that it was banned for years here in France. It's about innocent soldiers unfairly signaled out to be executed so that they were an example, so nobody would even think of deserting.
Okay, well, that's, two war films from 2 different eras, I suppose. Well, next to a screenwriter and director being celebrated here in Paris at the Forum des Images, Paul Schrader. Now, should we know his name?
Not necessarily, but chances are you already know his work. He wrote Taxi Driver, which Martin Scorsese, of course, directed. He wrote and directed American Gigolo with Richard Gere and Close by Giorgio Armani. And just 2 years ago, he wrote and directed First Reformed, starring Ethan Hawke. Now, it's a truism that artists tend to suspect their vocation early and begin nourishing their ambition, so it follows that if you aspire to be a screenwriter or a film director, you started watching movies on your way out of the womb. Well, but Paul Schrader grew up in a practicing Calvinist family, a very strict Protestant movement. Movies were forbidden, and he did not see his first movie until he was 17 years old. By the time I was 17, I had a head full of movies.
That's extraordinary. So he was like a blank slate, I suppose.
Yeah.
Now, looking back at his body of work, what are your favourites then?
Well, he made a miraculously singular portrait of the Japanese author Yukio Mishima, called Mishima, in 1985. It's entirely in Japanese, divided into 4 chapters that feel like a crash course in Japanese sensibilities. And while luxuriating in it, you wonder, how in the world did this thing get made in the first place? And when Schrader introduced it the other evening at the forum, he said, you won't be the only one wondering that. Autofocus is a gem about the sordid underbelly of supposedly wholesome American life, based on the true story of the actor who played Hogan on the TV series Hogan's Heroes, and his serious obsession with amateur porn way ahead of the curve that the World Wide Web would unleash. A personal favorite of mine that Schrader directed is Patty Hearst, which was in Cannes in 1988, and the French, I think, just didn't get it because she was kidnapped and conditioned to be a revolutionary by being sequestered in a built-in closet. And here in France, those are very rare. People have armoires. An audience member asked Schrader to comment on the fact that a lot of people are comparing the subversive vibe of the current hit Joker to Taxi Driver from 1976. And Schrader says he tries to stay away from that question because if I say the Taxi Driver is better than Joker, people say, oh, he's just defensive. But if I say Joker is better than Taxi Driver, I'd be lying. So that got a big laugh, and it happens to be true.
Harsh. Well, next to a film and an actress they've both become cult figures, Tippi Hedren is turning 90 this week, and in her honour, Marnie, one of the 2 films she made with Alfred Hitchcock, is being re-released here in France. Tell us more.
Yes, in Marnie, unaccountably called No Springtime for Marnie in its French title, Tippi Hedren plays an independent single woman who does secretarial work when she's not shoplifting or embezzling. Now, in 1917, the message that must be delivered is call off the assault on the Germans. The message Mark Rutland, a publishing executive and amateur psychologist, is trying to deliver to Marnie is, now that we're married, it's perfectly okay for us to have sex with each other. He's not going to give up until she gets that message. He suspects that Marnie has some deep, dark secret that makes her recoil from men. His approach is bottomlessly patient and, it must be said, slightly nutty. Now, I had the thrill of interviewing Tippi Hedren on stage in Vienna at the Biennale a few years ago after the audience had watched Marnie. Here's what Tippi had to say about the day that Hitchcock announced, after looking high and low, that he had finally found the male lead for Marnie, followed by a taste of the film.
Hitchcock couldn't find a Mark Rutland in Hollywood. Finally, Hitchcock came in and he said, I found your Mark Rutland. I said, great, who is it? And he said, Sean Connery. And I went, Sean Connery? Okay. Mr. Hitchcock, you know, my character, Marnie, is so frigid that when she sees a man, she just, goes blind. She doesn't see men. She doesn't want to have anything to do with them. I said, how am I supposed to deal with having Sean Connery in this role?
Who's your fan?
I just seem to have one of those faces.
So that film was actually a flop at the box office when it was originally released, but now it's considered a cult classic.
Oh, and deservedly so. It's very adult and strangely erotic, although the subject is more or less frigidity. In an interview Catherine Deneuve gave recently in a special issue of French Vanity Fair, she says that she finds Hitchcock a director of incredibly erotic films and that she would have loved to play the role of Marnie. Now, it is absolutely true that Hedren's acting career was maliciously ruined when she refused Hitchcock's advances, but Hedren herself is the first to say that Hitchcock was a brilliant director and everybody should seek out and enjoy his films. Hitchcock, she emphasizes, may have ruined her career, but he did not ruin her life. For me, she's a role model of how to survive bullying and sexual harassment, but it's worth keeping in mind that her daughter is Melanie Griffith and her granddaughter is Dakota Johnson. So those performance genes definitely live on. Take that, Alfred.
Well, we're wrapping up with a film that shines a light on the incredible creativity and resourcefulness among people living in Kinshasa. Director Renaud Barrault has returned to the Democratic Republic of Congo after his 2010 film Benda Bilili. That film was more focused on music, and this time he's looking at artistic production in general in the country's capital city.
I have to say, street art takes on a whole new meaning when you actually find your materials out on the street. The director knows his protagonists well and gives us front row seats to the weird art antics and installations of these very creative residents with names like Congo Astronaut. It's an education about edgy street art with something to say.
Okay, well, I'll be sure to check that one out. Thank you very much for joining us this week, Lisa. Let's take a short trip to Kinshasa then. Here's a clip of Système K. Do remember to check out our website for more movie news, and you can keep up with us on social media too. There's more news coming up on France 24 just after this.
L'art eza vie na ngai eza endroit oyo epesanga accès ya koloba ezongisela ngai pe liberté.